All right, Mayor, I'm going to kick it over to you to get things started.
All right. Well, it's great to be back with everybody. Thanks for taking some time to join us. I hope everybody's keeping safe and holding up well. And I'm really excited to introduce you, if you haven't already spent time with him, to Cal Cunningham, somebody who is going to make a terrific senator. And I'm really excited for us to have this conversation here. You know, we're in a moment where we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We are inside of 100 days now to Election Day. And of course, with so much voting by mail, for many, Election Day actually begins quite a bit sooner than that. So this is very much the home stretch. And one place that I think is commanding a lot of our attention right now, and rightly so, is the US Senate. It's in the Senate that it is viewed as politically controversial to make sure that funding is in place for everybody to be able to get tests in the face of this pandemic. It's in the Senate that it's actually considered a political fight just to make sure that critical financial resources are getting to state and local governments that need it in order to be able to serve people. In the US Senate right now, it is hard even to make sure that funding is being made available so that everybody is able to vote in November. The Senate is ready for a change. It is radically out of step with the American people. And at a moment that's going to call for so much courage and imagination and boldness, we need the best possible US Senate to work hand in hand with Joe Biden as president next year. Now, the other place that I think deserves a lot of attention right now, in addition to the floor of the US Senate, is North Carolina, a state that is, I think, at the tipping point of a new political future, one that is under the leadership of Governor Roy Cooper, showing what's possible in areas that have been considered very conservative, but where voters see the effects of political decisions on their everyday lives. And we have in Cal Cunningham and his race to be the US Senator for North Carolina, a remarkable opportunity, not just to bring balance and common sense to the floor of the Senate, but to send there somebody who understands the meaning of service, a veteran, somebody who throughout his career has demonstrated his intent and determination to look after others. And I'm just so excited to reintroduce him to you. And I think you're going to love learning more about his campaign. So Cal, over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the state of the race and how does it feel after all of the campaigning and the work that you've done to now be inside of that 100-day mark?
Well, Mayor Pete, it's a little daunting. First of all, thank you for this chance for us to be together here on Zoom. Thanks for all the Win the Era participants that are a part of this today. We feel the eyes of the world on us here in North Carolina. But I'm grateful for the way in which you have sustained your engagement, the way you continue to help shine a light on what we're doing here, and the way that you inspired us. Frankly, our whole family, as I've told you before, you earned my vote. You earned my wife's vote. Frankly, she was working on me from an early time. Elizabeth is on the call with us today, as is my mother-in-law, Anne. But most importantly, in touching my heart, you earned the support of my 18-year-old daughter in the first time she walked into a voting booth to cast a vote for President of the United States. So it means a lot to be with you. And thank you for helping us keeping the eyes trained on North Carolina. As you mentioned, this is a tipping point state. I beat Tom Tillis in this race, and we're taking the gavels out of Mitch McConnell's hands. Increasingly, it looks like this is where we make the difference. As you know, when Joe Biden wins North Carolina, when we vote blue and are on the right side of history this fall, the Electoral College math for Donald Trump is almost prohibitive. And then we have in our governor a really strong champion for so many of the values that I've heard you lift up, that we're lifting up in this Senate campaign. His reelection is a landmark race in the state and in the country this year in the reelection for governor. So I'll tell you just briefly, we've had really good poll data lately. Morning Consult blessed us this morning with a 9-point lead. Yesterday, NBC Marist poll put us at 9 points ahead. Last week, it was public policy polling 8 points ahead. But we know in North Carolina, we don't do blowout elections. We do the narrowest of squeakers. We were for Obama in 2008 by a mere 13,000 votes. We elected our Governor Roy Cooper by 10,000 votes. That's 4 votes per precinct. We've also had good fundraising momentum, including from the help of so many Win the Era supporters. Your help solid quarters of financial support, and very importantly, have an army of volunteers who are making phone calls, including today. We've made over 2.5 million phone calls here in North Carolina, helping North Carolinians think about the plan that every voter needs to safely participate in the elections this fall. We're seeing off the charts requests for absentee ballots in our state, 8 times higher from Democrats than they were at the same point in 2016. So we're on a strong path, but Mitch McConnell says this is going to be his firewall. He knows he loses here and he loses the majority. Tom Tillis and Republicans are mounting a strong defense. And so we know this is going to be close. It's going to be a fight, and having sustained engagement from you and the Win the Era troops is going to be an important part of winning. So thank you.
Well, thanks. Those numbers are fantastic. But as you say, those numbers prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that you can win. It's up to us to make sure that you will win. And that number of phone calls you're making shows that you're doing everything that it takes. And it's part of why the Win the Era community is so excited to be in your corner and to have your back. So we got folks from all around the country sharing in the chat where they're from. We got a bunch of questions, some of which came in already earlier in Twitter. So I'm going to toss some of these questions your way. First is from Andrea in Ramona, California. Andrea says, both Indiana and North Carolina, briefly, she says, flipped to blue for Obama in 2008, proving that there's no such thing as a permanently red state. That's music to my ears. What do your states have in common, and how can Democrats win there in 2020 and or beyond? I'll share a couple quick thoughts just from an Indiana perspective. You're right. When Indiana flipped blue in 2008, that was the first time since LBJ that our state had done so. And it proved, first of all, that anything is possible, and also that people will respond to campaigns that speak to where they are, that speak to our highest aspirations and our best values, and that demonstrate that our lives will be different if we elect the right officials. And, whether it was here in Indiana, watching so many parts of this state vote for a Democrat for president for the first time in a long time, whether it was when I was running in Iowa, and we saw those counties that had flipped to Trump now having a lot of what I love to call the future former Republicans, not just caucusing for us, but rogering up to be precinct captains. We see that we're at a moment of historic realignment. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about North Carolina. So those are a few thoughts from Indiana that might rhyme with your experience, but I'd love to hear how you approach this on the ground and how you reach out to make sure that independents and Republicans or former Republicans feel welcome in your campaign while staying true to your values that motivate you as a Democrat.
Well, Pete, interesting observations from Indiana. And here, we're trying to lead by listening. We're deeply engaging with people and acknowledging that we will have reasoned disagreements on the issues. That's part of what it means to live in a wonderful democracy like we live in, but that we should honor each other's unique life experiences. We should be respectful of each other, that we should listen before we try to announce our solutions. And that thoughtfulness, I think, is being well received here, especially at a time when a lot of folks' voices they're expressing that they don't feel their voices are being heard in Washington. And that's across party lines. There's something very endemic in our human experience that we need to be heard, and especially in a democracy. Now, Andrea, I will confess, I had to watch the 2008 election from the comforts of my containerized housing unit in Baghdad, and that I watched Barack Obama walk out onto that stage in Grant Square as the call to prayer and the sunrise was coming up over the city of Baghdad early in the wee morning, half a day ahead of the United States. It was inspiring, but to know what happened in 2008, I really would have to consult with my expert, and that's my wife, Elizabeth, who was helping run the veterans and military families for Obama in 2008. We certainly rose to that moment in history, and we had not done it since Jimmy Carter's election in 1976. We got to do it again this fall.
Wow. Just out of curiosity, when you were in Baghdad, did you vote by mail, absentee?
I sure did.
So I got to think if that's good enough for you in Baghdad, and it was good enough for me in Kabul, and it's good enough for the President of the United States in Mar-a-Lago, it's got to be good enough for every American to vote by mail. And I hope that conversation moves in the right direction. I really like this question from Adam in Washington. Adam says, you were both in your late 20s when you were first elected to public office. What lessons did you take from governing at such a young age that you still benefit from today?
Boy, Adam, I'll start real quick. I would say one of my first observations is, and I think it's a message to all young people, that our voices as young people matter. If we are thoughtful about the issues, if we speak from our authentic experiences, and we seek to bring people together, that age is not a barrier to participation. In fact, there is a strong ethic that runs through our politics that rewards youth and that encourages youth. And I would encourage, Adam, you to be a part of it. If you've ever been inclined to participate in our government in that way, do. It is an extraordinary and rewarding experience. And I would say the other piece of that is your voice matters. And we all have to be in these fights, because occasionally, as is likely the case come January of 2021, we're a closely divided nation, and one vote or a small handful of votes can really change the direction of a country. I've seen it happen. I bet you've seen it happen. It's incredibly important that our voices are heard when those chips are down, and small numbers of votes can make a difference.
Well said. And the only thing I would add to that is I was constantly surprised by how receptive older voters were to being represented or served by a younger leader. And there's a chance for so many intergenerational conversations to happen right now. And I think, so many, including grandparents thinking about their grandkids, are thinking just like your 18-year-old daughter is about the future in different ways and for different reasons, but understanding that the choices that we're making right now are going to reverberate for the coming years, and the younger generation has so much on the line. Important question from Elizabeth in Newton, who wants to know, what are your plans to combat gerrymandering and voter suppression in North Carolina and all across the country? I know this has been a big issue in North Carolina, so I'm sure you've thought about this a lot.
If the majority of North Carolinians' voices were heard at the voting booth in 2018, Democrats would control the state legislature in both chambers, just as we won all of the statewide elections. But as you may know, Elizabeth, North Carolina has been the center of very extreme gerrymandering, and the Republican Party here very famously drew a congressional map. When asked, why is this map 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats, the author of that map said it's because he couldn't figure out how to make it 11 Republicans and 2 Democrats. This case and those circumstances went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which then punted on the question. But fortunately, our state courts, under our state constitution, have stepped in and barred the extreme gerrymandering and partisan considerations that went into those districts. I'm a strong believer that we need to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act and place, once again, under scrutiny by the Department of Justice and our courts, the way in which we draw districts. In addition, in North Carolina, to scrutinizing those districts for racial considerations, I think we should add to the Voting Rights Act that we scrutinize those districts for partisan considerations. Both parties have a habit of making the incumbents choose the voters rather than the voters choosing our elected officials. It's really bad for democracy. It's really harmful to policy making. It leads to really bad distortions, and it makes the electorate cynical. And so I'm a strong believer that we need to use the tools available to us to make sure that it's the voices of voters in the voting booth that give us the charge and the legitimacy in policy making, rather than the practices that we have seen in recent years.
Well said. And I remember that language from the court case, I think it was in North Carolina, that talked about how minority voters were targeted with, I think the language was almost surgical precision. And unfortunately, technologically, it's become even more possible for a lot of cynical actors to do just that. And we don't have to take that sitting down. No Americans believe it's the right thing. There's no argument in principle for gerrymandering, and yet it continues. So I know that you'll be attentive to ways to do something about that. And with Win the Era, we're continuing to build our relationships with efforts like Fair Fight Stacey Abrams' organization, the NDRC, the Democratic Redistricting Committee that Attorney General Holder and President Obama set up, and other initiatives that are focused on this. Because I think you're right, it's bad for democracy. And it's even bad for, I think, voter turnout. I think one of the reasons why we have lower voter turnout in this country, in addition, of course, to the voter suppression going on, which has to be beat back at every level, is the fact that there is a frustration from voters who feel like the politicians are picking out their voters rather than the other way around. Go ahead.
Quickly, Pete, that the author of the bill, that when it was struck down, the Fourth Circuit said targeted African Americans with surgical precision. That's the person I'm running against. He was the author of the bill. And so anyway, it's just one more reason that the stakes are as high as they are.
That right there should be reason enough to be enthusiastic about defeating him and electing you. Question specifically for you, Cal, from Michael in Kansas City. And then a follow-up question for both of us, which is what we can do to ensure safe in-person voting. So we'll come to that in a second. But his question for you, and I'd be interested to hear too, what do you find most difficult about campaigning during quarantine?
I love people. I love being out engaging with people. I love North Carolina and visiting and engaging people in the places that they call home. I miss traveling and knowing my state and meeting people in that way. But we're trying to take the same spirit of engagement online. We're doing a lot of Zoom engagement, town hall meetings. So we're trying to adapt to circumstances, knowing that as soon as it's safe for us to do so, that we'll get back out. It may not be before Election Day, though, so we're being thoughtful about it. We're putting public health first, as we all must. But I miss being with people.
Well, I think it's a challenge for all of us, because so much of campaigning is about gathering people together physically. But then again, we would not have this round the country group of people we have right now if it weren't for some of the new ways we're finding to campaign. So I think that's a blessing. That other part of the question, really important, I think, what we can do to ensure safe in-person voting, because no matter how much vote by mail, and I believe that every American ought to have that opportunity to vote by mail, in-person voting is going to be important for a lot of voters and a lot of Americans. I have just one thought, and then I'll invite you for any thoughts you have on safety and making sure in-person voting goes well. But one thing that I'm trying to push to anybody who will listen is to consider being a poll worker. This is not something that our generation on down usually does. It's usually retirees, traditionally, at least around where I live, who tend to volunteer to be poll workers. Now, you can't do it as a Democrat partisan, at least in most states. You take your political hat off, and it's public service, like jury duty. But one of the reasons a lot of polling locations closed this spring simply had to do with the fact that a lot of poll worker volunteers were retirees who couldn't safely come out during the pandemic. So that's one step that anyone can take, is to look into what it takes to be a poll worker, and make sure that a shortage of poll workers is not one of the reasons for there not to be enough polling locations in your community. But that's just one thought. I'd love to know your thoughts on, and how do you think about that balance of voting by mail and being able to safely vote in person?
Well, excellent question. One of the ways that we're thinking about it collectively right now is that every voter needs a plan to participate. And you can't wait till Election Day, where there are likely to be much more crowding, much longer lines. I've been an advocate for Election Day being a holiday, a federal holiday, so that we have more access to more buildings and places to disperse. Charlotte just very amazingly made the Panthers Stadium an early vote site, as well as other stadiums. But let me tell you, because we have a good governor, and our governor appoints the boards of elections, we have very strong executive directors and a 3-week early vote period, already a fairly generous early vote period. The executive director of our board of elections tasked every one of our 100 counties to implement one early vote site for every 20,000 voters. So right now, our boards of elections are planning to deploy a stunning number of early vote sites to help, particularly in our more urban communities, to make sure that we can fully, freely participate. It's going to require more poll workers. We've allocated more personal protective equipment, and we're trying to make sure that we're thoughtful about putting public health first. But then we're also engaging the electorate in discussions about no excuse absentee voting. And the number of requests for absentee ballots running 8 times right now higher than it was on the same day 4 years ago. I think there's going to be robust participation by mail as well.
No question. All right, we're coming a little closer to you. Ben in Asheville has a question. Says this is very much in the spirit of Win the Era, thinking to the future. There will still be work to be done after November 3rd, Ben says. Where should volunteers and staffers focus their energy after the election? And how can we avoid burning out?
Oh, heavens. Well, let me just say, first of all, Ben, I have to confess that my eyes are trained so firmly on November the 3rd and making sure that we're successful that it is, I'm even resisting the urge to think about what the world looks like and what the requirements are come January of next year. I would take the oath of office January the 3rd. But let me just share with you a couple of quick thoughts. Change comes from sustained commitment and engagement. It comes from finding ways through our communities to remain involved. And it's going to require a big lift through Election Day. I'm hopeful that when we wake up on November the 4th, that we can, as we would say in the Army, take a knee for a moment and celebrate success. We've got a lot of work to do between now and when we do, but when I take the oath and when President Joe Biden takes the oath later in January of 2021, the change that we need as a nation will require sustained commitment and engagement. And I'm going to be working with a lot of partners. I know that Pete and everybody on this call, Ben, you there in Asheville, it requires all of us to find ways to stay engaged. And there may be some formal structural things we can do, but it's going to require all of us to take our own initiative as well. And so, Ben, I would hope that you come away from the experience between now and November 3rd feeling empowered and deputized to be part of the change in Asheville and in Buncombe County in Western North Carolina for our state and for our whole country. And then rally other people to your side as well.
I like that, empowered and deputized, opportunity and responsibility together. I think that's a great way to think about it. Look, we got our work cut out for us for the next 90 some days, but I do think that the connections and the habits we build up now will serve us well as we continue to mobilize for that future that's at hand. I know we're coming close to the end of our time. There's a question from Covell, I hope I'm saying that right, Jr. in Portland, which I think is a great one to end on because it'll help us learn a little more about what makes you tick. The question is, what life experience or story would you say has most dramatically defined your legislative agenda?
Boy, that's a tough one. Let me just share a quick thought because I know it feeds back into the conversation about youth engagement. Growing up in the small town of Lexington, really was not involved in politics. I didn't connect the dots on how serving my fellow community members translated into political engagement until the summer of 1993. I stumbled into an internship. What would that be? 1993 so August 6th of 1993 was the last day of my internship. It was the day I watched the U.S. Senate deadlock 50-50 to pass Bill Clinton's budget. That if you remember the 90s or have studied the 90s, it changed the direction of our country, expanded opportunity, brought down poverty, raised wages, reduced the deficit, did a lot of things that were important for our country. That night, I watched Al Gore come into the well of the Senate and cast one tie-breaking vote. With that one tie-breaking vote, we changed the direction of this country. And I remember that night, it was the last day of my internship. It was also my 20th birthday. And I packed up my Jeep Cherokee the next morning, driving back to Lexington, North Carolina, thinking that we all have an obligation to be in this fight because we don't know when one vote will change the direction of our country. And that can mean volunteering. writing postcards. It can mean donating to the candidate of your choice, helping someone win, and it can be, going back to the question earlier, it can be running for office ourselves. We are about to enter an era come January of next year where the Senate is almost certainly going to be closely divided, and individual votes can make a difference. I would challenge everyone listening that your engagement matters. One vote can make a difference. I saw it on my 20th birthday. It's part of why I went back to Chapel Hill and became a student leader, part of why I ran for the state Senate later, part of why I believe that one service member in the Army could make a difference by volunteering for Iraq and Afghanistan. We all have a role to play, and we've got to roll up our sleeves and do it.
Well, I think that's a great note to close on. If you haven't already been convinced of why we need to do everything we can to get Cal into the Senate, think about that mentality, that basic understanding of service and making a difference, and what that could bring to Washington and the Senate the way it is today. I can't let you go without asking you to let everybody on here know what are the biggest things they can do to help make sure you're a United States Senator.
calfornc.com, and get us on Twitter, get us on Facebook, share. Tell your community of friends and supporters, donate, volunteer. All the links are there on the website. Stay engaged and make sure that your voice is being heard.
All right, great answer. I see folks are throwing some of those links into the chat too, so you can easily find them. Volunteer, donate, amplify, get involved, and we're going to have a lot to celebrate. Cal, I know you're going to your campaign will be a historic one. It's going to make such a difference to the trajectory of this country when it helps us retake the Senate. And I'm so thankful that you've decided to serve, served in uniform, served in office, and are now ready to serve North Carolina and Washington. So can't wait to place that celebratory phone call to you in November. But we know we got a lot of work to do to make that a reality. We're with you every step of the way. Thanks for taking some time. Everyone following this call, thanks for you taking some time and being committed to this. And we'll see you out there. Stay safe, everyone.
The whole group.
Take care,
Thank you to the whole Win the Air group. All the best.